What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of F1 Fantasy Pole Position. Testing is over. We are waiting for the game to launch. So I had to kind of do a little bit of a preseason testing wrap up with the one and only Coffee Corner Motorsport. Terry, how is it going?
It's good, mate. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, I'm excited for it. I mean, we're all sat in anticipation, waiting for the game to launch and waiting for the season start, really, aren't we? But I think we're all good to go. So counting down now.
Perfect. I'm not sure how your early 2000s American knowledge is, but Allen Iverson had a famous quote back in the day.
I mean, listen, we talking about practice, not a game, not a game, not a game. We talking about practice.
So that is quite infamous in the American sports landscape. But so testing, practice, but there's a lot that we can learn from the last 3 days of testing, right?
Yeah, there's always stuff to go on. How accurate it is a bit of a different sort of kettle of fish as such, but there's always something to go off and something to talk about if nothing else. We've got an idea of some things and we got an idea of some other things. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, I'm happy to pick your brain, let the F1 fantasy community, let the comments fill up with some questions for Terry at the end there that we can get to. But just in case someone doesn't know what you're about in the F1 fantasy space or the F1 space in general, just let people know what's up.
Yeah, so obviously I'm Terry from Coffee Corner Motorsport. I mainly do news, but obviously that's branched into the world of fantasy Formula One over on Fanamp with the fantasy Formula in the past season or so. So I bring the latest from the world of Formula One. So I try to bring news in a way that's accurate, in a way that you can read it without worrying about it being, clickbait or worry about it not being true. So I kind of try and wait until I know it's quite accurate before it comes. And I just really wanted to build a platform that was really inclusive of people. So no matter when you got involved in the sport, no matter what your knowledge level is, and just sharing that knowledge rather than seeing it sort of gatekept and kept close. I just want to put it out there so people know exactly what's going on in the world of Formula One and keep them up to date so they could just enjoy the sport for what it really is, really.
Perfect. Yeah, it's become part of my morning ritual to find you on TikTok. I got a little bit of streaming problems, I guess, every now and then, but here we go. So 3 testing observations, Terry. As the guest, I will let you go first.
I think for me, McLaren looks strong. I know that's been the general consensus, but that car looked like there's so much more to come from it. And what I mean with that is the stuff they were playing about with during testing was about different cooling layouts. It was about different parts on the car. It didn't really look like it was going at full speed. If you watch, I think it was Lando Norris on one of the days, there was so much more he had going into one of the corners. You could see the line he could have took could have been a lot tighter. He could have rode the curb a lot more. It just made me feel like there's a lot more to come from that car, despite obviously McLaren said they've changed a lot on it. It still feels like there's a lot to come from that 2025 car, that's for sure, looking at it from the early sort of observations.
Perfect. Yeah, F1.com gave us a little bit of some qualifying and some sim data that they had, and McLaren topped both of them here. Their gap in qualifying is bigger than the one they have in the race right now, but Ferrari and Red Bull and Mercedes had their own kind of gremlins going on in testing. We'll touch on those in a little bit, but yeah, the papaya looked super strong. I think it was Lando's long runs on day 2 where everyone kind of was like, okay, that's a little scary, but
Yeah.
We'll see what it looks like in Melbourne. Moving on to my first observation here is lack of running of the Red Bulls. And as we can see here in this next graph, Red Bull came in with the fewest amount of laps, 304 over the 3 days of testing. I know they had water pressure issue with Liam Lawson's car on day 2, I believe, but Mercedes and Haas all the way up there at 458 and 454. Red Bull doing 150 less laps than them, Terry. Is that something that we need to be a little bit concerned about going into the season, or is it because they're so established that they were okay taking it easy during the test?
I don't think they would take it easy. I think every team wants laps on the board and they want to get data because the more you get, the better obviously you can collaborate stuff, you can get that correlation going. So I don't think you would deliberately not want to do as much laps as all the others. I think as long as they got through their run program within the intention of what they wanted to do, it might not hit them so bad. But obviously, what we don't know going into this is every team arrives with that set of run programs, what they want to run, what setups they want to run, what parts they want to test. And what we don't know is how far each team gets through those tests. You'd imagine looking at like some Mercedes and Haas and even Racing Bulls with that amount of laps, they tested pretty much everything they wanted to. Red Bull, did they have to make a compromise going into sort of day 3 with, we're not going to do as much on this one because we wanted to try this out? I know that Red Bull changed their front wing for day 3 for Max Verstappen's car. It looked like they were having trouble dialing in setup, but then it is testing. You'll try new stuff out. You wouldn't expect a car to be amazingly accurate all the way around every single lap. Otherwise, there'd be no point in doing testing. Let's be honest about it. So I still think that Red Bull have got more to come. If I'm honest, it feels like we've not really seen what the RB21 can actually do. They've been very sort of cloak and daggered with their launch, very sort of coy about what's new on it, talking a lot about, Christian Horner said in the press conference, lots have changed, but refused to go into any sort of details over what has changed. Yet when it hit the track, it looked remarkably similar to the RB20, let's be honest, which is not a good sign if you're a Red Bull fan.
Yes. I think for me, it just like raises an eyebrow a little bit. Like, I think it was their technical director. I don't remember his last name. Pierre Vacher?
Yeah, Pierre Wache, yeah.
Guache. Yeah, he said that the test didn't go as smoothly as they wanted it to. I think he said that after day 3. So, yeah, but I'm not going to count out Red Bull. I've actually got Max winning the Drivers' Championship this year. Yeah. I think with the infighting between McLaren and the Ferraris, I don't expect Red Bull to actually compete for the Constructors' Championship, but Max is going to wrangle as much performance out of any car he's given. Like, he's not going to go down without a fight. He's going to be trying to make it 5 in a row. Moving on to your next point here, Williams, potential midfield winner. I mean, people were getting hyped. Carlos Sainz set the fastest time in all of testing. What did you see from the Grove outfit?
It's a tough one because you want to not get on the hype train because it is only testing. But I think the thing for me, for Williams, is they look more assured going into this season. They looked probably most prepared they've ever been in the past previous years. We've heard stories in the past, haven't we? They've turned up late. They rushed to get the car done. They didn't take the Mercedes rear suspension last year because they couldn't fit it into their development cycle. All those things aren't here this year. They look a lot more polished. They look a lot more ready for business. I think for me, it's how far can they push that development? As in, will they be strong at the start of the season, but then sort of scale backwards as they turn to 2026 development? We know that James Vowles has been very much, it's all about next year. So have they already switched off development? Or they're just kind of going, this is our package. We're going to start strong, but actually there's not much in terms of updates coming, to the FW47. Or is it actually a case of, they've got a car they can evolve and carry on? So I think with 2 drivers, they've got a good chance of scoring some good points in the midfield. But for me, it's a case of, is it going to be a start of the season and dip off, or is this them moving up back into the midfield again?
Yeah, I think I'm also wearing a Williams jumper. I know I saw you're wearing your Williams shirt over there as well. So I'm pretty much on the hype train. I'm not for F1 fantasy. I'm a little bit worried that like they might qualify too well and then sink back on Sundays, a la Haas a couple of years ago, where like they couldn't do anything on Sundays at all. But in general, I'm feeling a lot better about Williams than I am this next team that I want to talk about, and that's Aston Martin. Because frankly, to me, I'm not like tech savvy or anything like that, but I just thought their test was pretty, like, maybe abysmal is too strong, but like it did not seem to be going the right way. Lance Stroll was ill on Friday, but even before that, like I think on Wednesday, people were like, oh, they're hiding something because they're not doing that many laps. But at the end of the day, they were the second fewest amount of laps. Adrian Newey started work today, so congrats to him for getting off his gardening leave. But yeah, I just was not impressed with Aston Martin. The British Racing Green outfit did not look that good. Race simulation, as you can see here, like they struggled. We talked about McLaren at the top there, but yeah, Aston Martin came in below Kick Sauber. Maybe that's due to a lack of long running. But what did you see from the Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso team?
I think like you, the problem is I've not seen anything that's got me excited for it. There's a lot that's new on the AMR 25, but there's nothing on there which kind of gets you hyped that they've cracked something. They're going to go back to those, 2023 podium days. For me, it's a case of, will something come? I'm not too sure on Adrian's impact. I know we'll cover that a bit later on, but for me, I think at the moment they're certainly not going to get back in amongst the podiums or anything like that. I think they're going to be more. Can they get back into that midfield again? Can they get back into that? We know last year their pricing didn't really favour them in terms of obviously fancy formula, so that's probably going to be a big factor in terms of the game itself, where they come in price point. But for me, they've not shown enough to go. This is a car that's going to start delivering back to where they were, a couple of seasons ago, and back to challenging the top four. I think at the moment they probably struggle to break the top of that midfield pack.
Yeah, I think I've been kind of shouting it from the mountaintops all preseason, but I am Aston Martin's #1 hater this year. I think they're going to be the most boring team in F1 fantasy, probably in F1. Like you were saying, like maybe Williams gets a good first half of the year done and then they just turn off the tap. I think Aston Martin's already like, I don't even think they're turning it on this year. I think they're kind of like they brought a car to fulfill their duties. But yeah, I don't see what Adrian Newey is going to be able to do. Like I'm assuming he's going to be like a 2026 silver bullet for Fernando Alonso to try and get his 3rd world championship. But yeah, let us know in the comments, guys, what you guys think about Aston Martin or Williams going in. Like Williams seem to be on the rise, Aston Martin seem to be going down, but they are preparing for maybe a bigger stretch of success in the next set of regulations. George's, Sammy, and Michael have all said hi in the chat, so let us know where you guys are watching or listening from. Moving on to the final observation from you, Terry. Hit it.
Yeah, Sauber. So for me, I spent all last year talking about Sauber being a team in transition, and I kind of feel like I'm on repeat. It feels like Audi don't want them to do well. They don't want any sort of good results for them until they come in 2026. It feels like, they don't want to put development into now because they want it for themselves. And they just feel like a team just waiting for the new regulations, to be honest, with not a lot of, when you look at them in running, there's nothing in there. The setups look tough to run. They looked hard. They didn't look comfortable at any point. The pace was off. There just didn't feel like there was anything to get excited about. Again, with the team, with even a change in drivers, doesn't feel like it's going to show them. Sort of moving at the grid, it feels like they're just, like I say, they're just waiting for 2026, which feels a shame if you're obviously Nico Hülkenberg and Gabriel Bortoletti from their point of view. Because I just don't think they're going to have a car that's even going to be remotely near the points, if I'm honest, at the moment, unless they're in a race where they can capitalize on something like a weather or mistake or something like that, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, great points. And the media agrees with you. This is from Tint on Reddit, in the F1 Reddit. They've got the media consensus after preseason testing. Sauber, rock bottom. No one voted them over 10th. ESPN, RN365, therace.com, SI.com, F1i.com, motorsport.com, all had them dead last. McLaren was a consensus 1 and Sauber was a consensus 10. So yeah, really the only 2 things that people agreed on right there. But yeah, it feels bad. Like Nico Hülkenberg did so well in Haas and his reward was job security to get in an Audi seat for 2026, but they didn't really reward him with any good cars. It feels very like American football or just like American draft style, where like the best college player goes to the worst team. Like that's kind of how it feels for Hülkenberg. Maybe Hülkenberg's not, the rising star. But yeah, Bortoletti, I'm pretty excited for him. Like if that car is as bad as we think it's going to be for F1 fantasy purposes, we love when our guys qualify P19, P20. If they just trundle along the back, pick up a couple of DNFs here and there, and they gain some positions, like Bortoletti could be a little bit of a budget gainer at the start, and that is super, super vital for us. Last point for me here, Pierre Gasly continues his strong finish. He didn't really make any huge waves during testing, but I think he was 5th on day 3 with a pretty good flying lap. He was actually at the top of the times before like the big guns kind of came out for the last hour of testing. But if we look at the screen right here, Terry, first 19 races, Pierre Gasly had 8 F1 points and 5 points finishes, was qualifying 14th, finishing 13th, and was averaging 1.74 F1 fantasy points per race. The last 5 races, however, which is when Alpine really turned it on. And I believe there were some like development, front wings, and stuff like that came in, and they seemed to really favor Pierre because Esteban Ocon was going out. 32 F1 points, 4 points finishes, 1 DNF. So maybe he would have scored because he was running pretty strongly in Vegas, if I remember correctly. 8.6 was quali average, 6.25 was his race average, and he was averaging almost 12 F1 fantasy points per race. So the hype for Pierre Gasly is kind of building for me. I could see him, hopefully we'll see pricing in the next couple of days, but I think he'd be a super strong third driver if you can afford him. What do you make of Gasly and maybe just like Alpine in general? Do you believe that they are on the rise? They, like we're talking about, their 2024 testing was pretty abysmal and it took them a long time to get back up. Do you think Alpine can be best of the rest in 2025?
I think they've been there. I mean, they arrived last year in a bad shape. The car was overweight. The development was poor. They made a lot of changes last year, which I think they've carried into this year. If you look at their car, it's saying evolution rather than revolution. I think I just described it in an article I've just written. So it's got a lot of characteristics of last year's car, but that's not a bad thing because, like you say, their performance at the back end of last year, actually, they moved up. So I think they front-loaded their development. So I think during the half of the season where they had to change the chassis, they had to change the front wing, all those bits they had to do, I think they boxed a little bit cleverer and made sure it can last them into 2025, knowing that the regulations were the same. So now they've come into this year, they haven't changed the chassis. So suddenly that money, which you have put aside for it, you can then develop on the current car or even the 2026 car. So I think they've done a lot of clever developments from the back end of last season. Focusing on Pierre Gasly, I think Esteban Ocon was potentially used a bit in a testing format, if I'm honest. Maybe trying some bits out that they wanted to get some data on towards the end of the season when obviously, we knew he was going, and they obviously swapped in Jack Doohan at the end as well. So I think they're doing some things like that cleverly for this season so that actually this car is not unknown to them. They know exactly what package they got. They can try and maximize where they can. They can look at what's coming in 2026. They've got a big development curve ahead with obviously swapping over to Mercedes as well. But also that's going to save them because they're not developing their gearboxes, for example. They're taking that from Mercedes. Their rear suspension, potentially, they can do it. All those things they can buy as a customer team from Mercedes that Aston Martin and Williams do actually can help you because it frees up. Yes, you got to learn how to integrate it for next season into your car. But for the final year of regulations, you don't have to worry about developing that side of things. You just need to know what's coming, and that can save you that way.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'd actually read that they were not changing their chassis for 2025, and that was sending off alarm bells. But you're saying that they improved that at the end of 2024 with a view of they wouldn't have to change it in 2025. The other question I have about Alpine is they're taking on a Mercedes engine in 2026, right? They're becoming a customer team, is what they would call it. Is that going to impact? Like, will they be able to focus more in 2025 and 2026 on developing the car now that they don't have to worry about like an engine? Or I believe there's something like an engine freeze. Is that something in F1 that like we need to worry about?
Yeah, so you got two things. It won't give them any more money to spend because your engine's actually separate. So what you've got is you've actually got an engine cost cap and you've got a normal cost cap. Now the engine cost cap doesn't get talked about. So the current engines are in this freeze, which obviously finishes at the end of this year. Alpine really struggled with theirs. They're sort of about 30 brake horsepower down, so they couldn't get it up to the right level. They did ask for permission to spend more money. It got refused by the other teams in the FIA. So that's one of the reasons they went with Mercedes. And also, there's a lot of talk they're being sold as well. That's another reason. So pulling out engine-wise is good for business if you're trying to sell a Formula One team. But ultimately, with the engine side of it, it does mean that a lot of the other stuff you can get with it, so like the gearbox, the rear suspension, your customer team, you've got that relationship, you can buy in parts. So like Racing Bulls do obviously with Red Bull. We know that Williams do it. In terms of chassis, believe it or not, Williams are actually using the same chassis, but it's not being talked about. So Alpine have been quite open about this, saying we're running last year's chassis, but actually Williams are doing exactly the same, just some very minor tweaks. And I wouldn't be surprised with the regulations saying the same if actually a lot of teams have done that, just not actually come out and talked about it. If you've had like a Ferrari suspension change, you've got to change the chassis. But actually, if you're running a similar setup to last year, you don't need to. You might just need to tweak it. And like I say, it's a big cost. But if you've got it right, it's also a big cost saving if you can reuse it and just adapt it. So With the engine side, it probably takes a bit of the pressure off because they know that they got the Mercedes one coming. It might allow them to redeploy some staff if there is a bit of crossover between the two, where they might be able to bring someone who may have been working on the engine side back into the fold with the sort of chassis development side. So there could be some crossover there. But in terms of the cost cap, it doesn't make a big difference because you still got that set budget.
Perfect. I learned something. I learned more about F1 today, so I'm a better person going to bed than I am when I woke up. So thanks for that. Was a great breakdown, like very in depth. I love that. Thank you, thank you. Like that's why we got you on. The tech wizard of F1 fantasy is in the house. So yes, that was a great breakdown. Appreciate it, Terry. So now we've gone from our observations. I'm kind of gonna pick your brain a little bit now with kind of like selfishly my 3 questions after testing. So we've got less than 2 weeks now, but teams that were struggling, like Aston Martin, maybe Red Bull, like how much can teams change between now, March 3rd, and when cars hit the track in about 11 days on March 14th? Like, are they stuck? Do they have hope? Like, what's the deal?
Quite a lot can change, actually. The really good thing for us as fans is with this gap, it's allowed the teams to go back to the factory and crunch the data. So normally, we know that we normally go into the opening race in Bahrain the following week. And also, if you look at day 3 normally in testing, it's all around getting a good optimum setup for that opening race of the season because you're on the same track, so you can try new things. What we've got this year, because it's later, because it's in Australia, it's allowed the teams to go back to the factory and start crunching that data, start crunching that what it's showing in terms of the correlation with the wind tunnel, start seeing if there's anything they can tweak. Yes, they haven't got the sort of advantage of being on the same track, but they have got the advantage of an extra week. Now, in terms of the cars, most of the parts would have been shipped to Bahrain anyway, because that's just the way Formula One works. So they haven't got the parts to take with them. They wouldn't have taken the parts back to the UK. They probably would have shipped them straight on from there, straight on. So they would have taken a lot of it with them as a rule of thumb. So they've got those bits there. So they can do a lot in this time. It's a lot of people sort of saying, oh no, not a lot could happen. But actually, with that time, all that data they've got, 400 odd laps for some teams, they can run it through the simulator. They can reload the simulator with exactly what they want to, recreate what they're expecting down in Melbourne, and actually just see if by tweaking some bits they can get good performance. So I actually think it's good for them in a funny sort of way.
So you're saying that my bet I put at the bookies for McLaren to go 24 of 24 was a mistake. There is hope for.
Well, they might get even faster. I mean, I
know. Yeah, I mean, just since we're talking about this, I mean, Adrian Newey did join Aston Martin today officially. F1 put out a little bit of a tweet. I mean, in my head, like he's not going to touch the 2025 car too much. Like, do you think that he's been brought in for 2026, right? Like that's going to be like his baby, like the first time he'll be like, this is my Aston Martin car kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's 2 things. One, Adrian's playing catch up, but not a great deal. So the team started developing, 2nd of January on the 2026 cars. Obviously, Adrian's joining him. We're on like the 3rd of March. So he's got a couple of months behind. I don't imagine that Aston Martin would have done a lot deliberately because obviously your wind tunnel allocation is for the whole year. So what I imagine they've done is actually banked a lot of it ready for when Adrian joins rather than use it. So they'll probably be doing it almost like, a double run, double overtime to catch back up with everyone else, which when you listen to what they've put in place for Adrian, so Adrian's talked about, I don't know if you heard about this, sleeping arrangements at the factory.
I just saw that before we came on.
Yeah. So he's asked for a lot of stuff. The one thing I will say is having Adrian on board is just like a fountain of knowledge. And whilst his focus is on 2026, that's not to say he can't make an impact on 2025. He knows these regulations inside out. He's been sat bored, let's be honest, whilst he's been on garden leave, not working on the Red Bull. I imagine he's been working on his own about what he wants for 2026. He's not been able to have contact with the team search, but that hasn't stopped him sketching, drawing, getting ready for today. He would have had ideas. I would imagine there's been a way where he's certainly from testing, seen what Aston Martin had got, if he's not had a sneaky peek beforehand, from the launches, F175, all those sort of things, renders, all those sort of things. So he might be able to just come in and make a difference on the back of, this is what I've seen, let's try this because it worked. Whether or not he will, I don't know. I would imagine they want his input, but his focus, like you right say, is on 2026, on his sort of first design car. But I also wouldn't rule out an Adrian Newey sort of, you can imagine a meeting today going, actually, let's see what we got on this year's car to see if we can make a difference on the current cars to see if we can gain some places back.
Okay. Yeah, maybe like Andy Cowell or Mike Crack or
Yeah.
Lawrence Stroll's iPad with all the data was accidentally expressly shipped overnight to Adrian Newey's
Or
house on Saturday.
left somewhere in a gym or
Oh,
somewhere on
yeah.
a table for him, Like when Adrian works in paper, so he's probably
Oh,
just
yeah.
took some sketches with him while he's been on a tour and just left them there and gone,
Can't
try
even
this
work an
instead.
iPad. What are you talking about? Like,
Probably
so.
Adrian's car. He's probably just left it there and gone, here you go.
Yeah, I mean, maybe
But
the first thing he needs to work on is making sure their hypercar's door can stay on. I'm not sure if you saw that over the weekend. Their
I saw that.
hypercar had a little bit of an accident. If you haven't seen that, I would go check that out on X. All right, second question for you, tech wizard of F1 Fantasy. What effect will Pirelli's tire changes have in 2025? So they're getting a C6 in. And also, they were talking about a ton on the broadcast during testing. The gap is further between the C1 and the C2 compound. So the C2 is now slightly closer to the C3, from my understanding. What can you kind of give us that we should be knowing about that for like F1 Fantasy, or like when we see the tire allocations going into a Grand Prix? Is that something that we need to weigh up when we're selecting our teams?
I think it'll become more evident as the team goes on, as the season goes on. Sorry, but I mean, for me, it's that C0 tire which we never saw, was it? We had one last year that was muted as being around, but never actually made it to a single event. It come out at the start of the season, we got these compounds, and then we never saw it ever again. For me, I'm hoping there's more with the tire degradation. I'm hoping that actually, I keep saying I want to see tire degradation, but not in a way that makes it dangerous. I don't want to see tires exploding or anything. But what I want to see is go back to strategy. You go back to a few years ago when we had, sort of Red Bull catching Mercedes catching Red Bull by undercutting, putting an extra pit stop in. I want to see that sort of racing again. So my hope is, and it is a hope, not based on any sort of knowledge at the moment with these tires, but maybe that I think the tire day's got too good. We shouldn't be having tires where you can pit after one lap and they last the whole race. That's just bonkers. So hopefully by introducing the compound, we know last year they tweaked a few where they, made some bits softer to try and spice up the racing. I'm hoping that with a new tyre in the mix, we can do a bit of that, where maybe run a softer tyre, which, like you said, the advantage is bigger for the team. So actually, you weigh up, do I go for a softer tyre that's going to be faster, but actually the deg's going to be there, or do I pay it safe for that one, or can I pit an extra time and get that soft tyre and really burn through some laps and do 20 qualifying laps to catch up? That's what I'm kind of hoping for with all these compounds available. But like I say, it's more hope than based on any knowledge at the moment. Until we see him on track in a competitive situation, that's going to be the difference, really.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. It'll be maybe we'll learn some more once we get to Australia or whenever these tires. Is C6, is that a Monaco tire? Is that pretty much going to be a Monaco tire specifically, or is that like?
I mean, they got to run two different tires, haven't they? Two pit stops, two different compounds, haven't they, in Monaco this year? So I imagine, but you probably want to just hit those C1 hards on them. Probably just my worry is somewhere like Monaco, you'd go for the really hard one if it's available and just sit on it, and just literally sit there. But if you want to make two stops there, you might want to go for a fast one. I imagine sprint weekends might make it a bit interesting. Depends on what the gap is between them, to be honest. But like I said, it's until we see them in a competitive situation, it's hard to tell. Pirelli get that data, but from the Pirelli tire test, we never see the data. Very rarely do we see any lap times or any data when they hold a Pirelli tire test at all. It's not shared. We don't get any insights from it. The teams don't talk about it. It kind of just happens in the background. We get notifications say such and such was on track doing a Pirelli tire test, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think Carlos was on track yesterday doing a Pirelli tire test, the 2023 car doing a 2026 test or something like that.
So that's where they adapt it. So what they've got is they've got the 2023 cars because they can't run the newer cars. But what they do, they slightly adapted the wheels on them. They're like mule cars so that they can fit the 2026 tires. Because even though the tire sizes are the same, they're actually different in terms of what they're going to be. So they're the same sort of, I think it's 19-inch, but they've actually made them slightly different. So they've adapted the cars to run them to get the data on them.
Okay. All right. Yes. More tire knowledge. Just learning so much in this 30 minutes so far. Final question for me. We got this flexi win thing coming in
Yeah.
Spain. How much are these changes? So I think I got this right. 15 millimeters of flex to 10 millimeters of flex. And we don't have to get too much in the weeds about what that actually means, because I know there's quite a lot that goes into it. But like, is this something where us as F1 fantasy managers, can we expect a huge shift in the field? Or like, is McLaren already prepared for this because they were kind of the leaders in the flexi wing in 2024? Like, we got the wild card chip. Are you maybe like, I'm kind of thinking like, save it for then to see if anything does switch. Like, what are just your thoughts about that?
This is a bit more controversial from what people think. So to quickly summarize, at the moment they do a static test on the front wings. At the moment, it's allowed to flex 15 millimeters. Now, last year the FIA said that they were happy with it, and that's what it's going to say for the whole of 2025. Then they've rode back on that, so they've gone, we're going to do the same test, but that flex is going from 15 to 10, so they can't flex as much. The teams naturally kicked back and went, whoa, hold on. We've done it to 15 millimeter flex because every team will go for the optimum. They always will. So that's why we've got this Spain ruling, because basically the team said we haven't got time to now go back and redevelop a front wing with a 10 millimeter flex because we've got the cost cap and we've got all the other development going on, 2026 cars. So we want a point in the season where we change over because we don't agree with you. We want to keep it. But actually, from a fairness point of view, you told us it was going to be the same and you're now changing the goalposts on it. So they're saying the design regulations haven't changed. And this is why it's a bit of a sneaky move by the FIA. So they haven't changed the design at all of them. What they've done is they've designed a test that changes the amount of flex you're allowed, which is ultimately changing the design. But that's how they've got around it. With it's not a technical directive, it's not anything else. It just means at the moment, if you flex 50 millimeters, you're past. By the time you get to Spain, if you're still flexing 50 millimeters, your front wing's deemed illegal. So the teams are in a bit of a conundrum with this. A lot of the teams at the back end of last year, they started developing these new flexi front wings on the basis of the rules were staying the same. So there was a couple of teams, Ferrari in particular, Red Bull in particular, didn't have a flexi wing last year at all because they were waiting for the FIA to clarify it. Whereas like McLaren and Mercedes were running these flexi wings quite heavily towards the back end of last year. So those teams you'd expect to be more prepared, but now they've got to kind of row back on it and go the other way. But the teams who have developed it, like Red Bull, they've gone in all in on this 15 millimeter development and have now got to row back on it. So this could shake absolutely everything up. And it's the case of, going back to the mini DRS with the McLaren rear wings, you can equalize the field very easily by changing these regulations.
Okay, good to know. Okay, so maybe we won't activate it in Spain, but maybe the next round in Canada will have a whole round of data to be like, I got to change my entire team. Like this is so okay. So hold on to that wildcard chip, F1 Fantasy Managers. You heard it here first on F1 Fantasy Pole Position with Terry. So yeah, I'm pretty interested. I think I saw a rumor that McLaren was actually the one that were trying to change this rule, but I'm not totally sure about that. I'm not sure if I saw it on my verified newsfeed on Coffee Corner Motorsport on one of the mornings. So I'm not sure if that's kind of a verified source. All right, so the 3 questions are done. We only got a couple more things to go here. Limitless in China. This has been a big topic of conversation in my head because I've been thinking about this for about a month straight, even though the season was this far away. Limitless in China. China, second race of the season. It's a sprint race. However, we're only going to we got 3 days of testing, but we don't really know how that's going to play out in China or Australia or whatever. So essentially, we've got 4 practice sessions, a qualifying, and a Grand Prix worth of data to go off of before we potentially activate the most powerful chip in F1 Fantasy. Now, at the time of this recording, the game has still not launched. So maybe when this goes out, there will be no Limitless chip. Who even knows? But I hope it remains because this is very interesting. I've been thinking about it for a long time. So in your opinion, Terry, is that enough data to go off of to activate the Limitless chip? Or are you going to be pretty hesitant? Maybe wait for the next sprint in Miami? What are you thinking here?
I would personally probably want to wait, but I also think it's an opportunity to game big if you get it right. But I feel, like you say, second race of the season is going to be more luck than judgment, unless, of course, there's a clear sort of we come out of Australia, there's like a domination from a couple of teams where you can look at it and go, actually, there's a couple of teams who have got these, new cars absolutely bang on. But I think, like you say, it feels like it's too early this year. I mean, last year, the first sprint was a few races in, wasn't it? So you had a bit more data to get on. I know people gained big, last year in the first sprint race, but I think this one kind of feels it's too early in the season. For me personally, I mean, but I feel that it might be one, if you gamble and get it right, I think you'll win big because everyone else will be waiting on it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I'm kind of, and the other thing that we have to think about is if you do play that limitless chip in China, that team that you set in Australia on March 14th, 15th, or 16th, wherever you are in the world, that's going to be the team that also gains budget in China as well. So you can't, like, you might not be able to maneuver, like if you've missed the boat on a budget riser, that sort of thing, and you want to pivot, but if you're kind of like set on doing limitless in China, like maybe even like it's pretty tough. So there's a lot of decisions to go into it personally, and there's like a pretty big difference, right? Like Albert Park is a street track hybrid-ish, like it's like the most racy kind of street track that we've got on the calendar, kind of. And then China is like a traditional track, so like you may not even be able to tell what, like, is there going to be a lot of correlation between those two races, or could we expect some cars to just kind of pop up the grid at a different type of track?
I think they pop up, and also you got to think about weather in China as well. It's prone to changing, to rain, all those sort of factors as well. So I think it always
Mercedes,
cooler temperatures. Mercedes, anything less than 5 degrees, and they're suddenly, looking like a completely different car. And it's that sort of thing, though, isn't it? That actually we joke about it, but last year you put a cool track on, suddenly Mercedes come alive. Bahrain was the most cold temperature they've had for testing. Is that Mercedes performance linked to the fact it was actually cold in Bahrain, or have they solved it? No one can answer that question. That is a massive unknown going into Australia. Have Mercedes solved that problem with the engines and running in the warmer temperatures, or actually is their pace in Bahrain on the back of it was cold and it was wet and it was overcast and it was warmer in Silverstone for when the day's tested than what it was in Bahrain, which was just bonkers when you think about it.
I mean, clearly what Mercedes needed to do this entire time was get rid of a 7-time world champion. Like, that's what has fixed all of their ailments.
I'm racing the cold.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but so limitless in China, I'm still on the fence. I like, it is such a huge delta that you can gain over the rest of the field, because you might have a chance to kind of catch up, get a little bit of budget by the time Miami comes along, and maybe you can afford like 2B drivers, that kind of thing. So it's something that I'm certainly thinking about for the next week and a half as we get closer and closer to Australia. Final point here is going to be the biggest testing takeaway from us, kind of with an F1 fantasy spin on it. I'm just going to take the easy one out of here. McLaren looks on top. If I'm thinking about building a race one lineup right now, like in my head, I can't get away from like a Ferrari, McLaren, Piastri kind of lineup. If Lando's like really expensive, I'm pretty sure I can get away from him because I'll have the constructor and I'll have Oscar. Oscar's didn't really have any like wow moments in testing, and he did fade a tiny bit towards the end of last season, but home race, no papaya rules. Everything is starting 0-0, 0-0 in F1 and all the championships. And I think he's going to come out of the gate flying. But Terry, you've got a few points, so I'll let you take the floor.
Yeah, no, like you, I think McLaren looks strong, whichever one you want to go for. I think that McLaren constructor kind of seems like a general consensus to kick off the season, if nothing else. And then, like I say, one of the drivers, depending on what budget you're going for. Sainz kind of reminds me, depending on his price, that could he be like a Hulkenberg? Yeah, Magnussen kind of price point and kind of point scoring. We saw that last year with Haas in that middle quite a lot, didn't we? Where actually they picked up some really, really good points. So I'm wondering whether Sainz and the Williams could fall into that. Like I say, depending on price and how they start. And Aston Martin is a gamble, but I also feel it could be a gamble that if it pays off, it will pay off big based on what we're seeing in testing. So going back to your points about them looking like a shambles, it's also one of those where if they do manage to get it right, actually, is that going to be a differentiator with all the other teams? Because everyone's looked at it and gone, I'm not going to go for that in terms of fancy. But if someone does go and suddenly, Fernando puts a bit of magic in or something and Aston pop up somewhere, you gain big on it.
Perfect. We got a couple of questions in the chat. If you don't mind sticking around
No,
for a
go
little
for it,
bit. Chris02, this is not directly towards you. When do we get the driver prices? I've been asking myself that for the last 24 hours. My guess is sometime this week. I do think we're going to have a 2 or 3 day buildup to get to the game launch. So nothing as of right now. This is 7:40 Central European time for me. I haven't seen anything on their Twitter.
No.
So I think at the earliest at this point, it's going to be Thursday. It might just be Friday, and they just give us a week to kind of build up. But this next question here, Terry, is for you. Georgia says, Terry, who do you think has the higher chance to win the World Drivers' Championship? Will the max factor be enough? Now, I don't know if you're doing like a podcast special predictions reveal, so you don't have to give it away, but where are you thinking right
now?
now?
I'm happy to talk about it. I think max is always a factor. I mean, for me, has that Red Bull got enough to make Max a factor? Because it doesn't need to be the best car on the grid for Max to get points and win. And I think that's the key for me is have Red Bull done enough to get Max into that frame? Because like George has said about the Max factor, it is a factor. It's a consideration. It's something you have to bear in mind. He will, like you said earlier, he will ring everything at that car to try and go for a win. So if he's in with a sniff of a chance, you can guarantee he's going to be going for it. So I think providing Red Bull have done enough, yeah, I think my early sort of thoughts still are Max on the Drivers' Championship, McLaren on the Constructors. I still think that Max is too much for differentiating those for that, unless Red Bull have got like really wrong in their development and Ferrari and Mercedes have leapfrogged them, and then Max might be in trouble based on the performance of the car not being able to get enough out of it.
And that £1 billion pound offer to Aston Martin might start to rumored contract to Aston Martin might need to start looking a little bit better. But that's going to do it. Terry, before we get you out of here, just plug your stuff again. Let us know where we can find you throughout the entire season and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, so obviously I'm Coffee Corner Motorsport on pretty much all of the social media channels now. So YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, over on X. I've got a website this year, which is www.coffeecornermotorsport.com. I launched that this year to house everything. So it's got all the podcasts on, it's got all of the articles on, it's got the social media links. So I wanted somewhere quite central where I can put everything together. So if people want to listen to a podcast, they can do that. If they want to catch a written article, they can do that as well. What I was finding is by dropping it into all the different ones, it got a bit where people might have been missing stuff. So the whole point of that is to put it on there. I started doing my podcast, Formula One Express News, on a weekly basis this year. That's something which I've done since the start of the year. That seems to be really popular. So what I do with that is just take the headlines. So all those morning headlines you see, all I've been doing is picking 4 or 5 out of them, put them into a 30-minute news show, delving into them in a little bit more detail, just going into it a bit more about what it means, what it looks like, so people can keep up to date with almost the top storylines from that week. So it just gives you a lot more into it, a bit like we've done here, where you just take the headline and just go into it a bit more. So yeah, and then obviously in terms of fancy, I'll be joining Adam, and obviously we got a new host in Zach. Sad to see Rob move on to things, but I know he's got some great things planned. And I really enjoyed working with Rob last year, so I'm really excited to see what Rob's got. But I'm also excited to see Zach join the team and see what he can bring over on the Fancy Formula 1 Fan Amp as well. So we're going to be continuing. There's a preview show, which Adam and Zach are going to do, and then we're going to be back doing the live deadline streams, which I'll be joining both of those for. So all of those seem really exciting. Got some good stuff planned for Fancy Formula. Got some good, Adam's obviously great at doing guides and chip guides and everything else going on with that. So, shout out to him. I'll just bring the technology and try and engage off in what I can in terms of Fancy Formula. So yeah, it's going to be an exciting season.
Yeah, I am very ready. I had Adam on Friday for day 3 reactions, kind of like instant kind of stuff, and that was a blast as always. Adam's been on the YouTube channel quite a bit, and it was great to have you on today, Terry. I really appreciate you coming on and giving us. I learned some like F1 stuff and like F1 fantasy stuff. So yeah, I'm super pumped for the season. Hopefully we get this in the next 2 or 3 days that we will. But if you need to like figure that out, follow me on X at F1 Fantasy Ewan. You can follow Terry on all his social media platforms. He's all over the place. You can't even miss it. So like anytime you go on anywhere, but Yeah, thanks again for coming on. And thanks again to everyone for all the preseason content. Next episode that I will have will be talking about the game launch. And it might be a live stream. I'm hoping it's a live stream. But yeah, it's going to be a blast. Like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're almost at 1,500 subscribers. So we are slowly getting there. But yeah, thanks to Terry once again. Thanks to all the guests I've had in the preseason. I've had Rob, I've had Ray, and I've had Adam and Terry to end it all. It's been fantastic. But once again, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And I will talk to you next time.